After the long and bloody battles of the North African desert and the fall of the African Corps and the invasion of Sicily and the fall of Italy in 1943, the Allied High Command turned their eyes elsewhere, from Western France and the gate to Hitler's fortress Europe. Leading the invasion was General Dwight D. Eisenhower, with a hand-picked general staff who would eventually lead the Allied into Germany herself. The invasion was of political importance as well as military. The Soviet Union had long been waiting for the Western Allies to do something that would draw Hitler's attention. It was a complex operation, with the obsession for details, though this was necessary, because an invasion like this had never taken place before. It would involve infantry, airborne infantry, armor, various types of vessels, and aircrafts. If the invasion would have taken place between Dover and Calais, this would not only be an obvious move, but the sheer size of the armada wouldn't fit where the channel was at its narrowest. Instead, the invasion was to take place further south, in Normandy. Soon after the Blitz and the American entry of the war, the Allied bombers could be seen all over Western Europe, day and night, in purpose to weaken the German defense for the upcoming invasion by bombing strategic targets and large cities. Many thought, just like Hitler did during the Blitz, that this would make the Nazis give in, but it did only result in great suffering for the citizens. Another factor that would help the invasion was the Maquis, the French resistance. Some war veterans, but often civilians, who would arm themselves to stand up to the occupiers. Through sabotage and espionage, they would give the Allied invaders a head start. The first soldiers to invade didn't rush ashore from landing crafts, but from airplanes, behind the front lines of the German defenders. Glider and parachute drops were made all over Normandy. Including bomber and fighter raids, almost 5,000 planes flew on D-Day. The 101st and the 82nd American Airborne, along with the British 6th Airborne and the 325th Glider Infantry, made their way over the English Channel, estimating a total of 23,000 men. Their objectives were to slow down the German reserves and secure some strategic targets such as bridges and road crossings, and in the day join up with the naval armies. But due to poor weather and a heavy cloud bank just outside the coast of France, the planes got separated and their drops were very shattered, and very few objectives could be achieved. Still, the ones who had been, and slowing down the German defenders, were remarkable, since the expected casualty rate was almost 80%. The naval invasion was to take place in the pocket between Cherbourg, Le Havre and Caen, where the German defenses were less strengthened than further north. The landings themselves were to be made on 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno and Sword. The destruction of coastal guns needed daylight. The landing crafts needed low water in early morning, and the airborne attacks needed full moon. This narrowed the date of the invasion down to the 5th, 6th or 7th of June. This was an all-arms operation, which means that each of air, land and sea elements had to work together to achieve success. This required many new ways of working that hadn't been tried before, such as beachmasters who controlled the unloading of men and supplies. A whole range of specialized armored vehicles were developed to deal with specific problems, such as the flail tank that cleared mines, or the flamethrower tank that attacked concrete bunkers at close range. Another tactic was having artillery guns firing from the landing craft as they closed in on the beach. By doing this, the artillery could contribute to their own successful landing. Overhead, the Air Force were flying two types of sorties. One to attack specific targets on the ground, and one as an on-call fire support for the troops who needed it. In the early hours of June the 6th, the Allied Armada set sail towards an unsuspected enemy at the coast of France. The number of ships used is stupefying to the imagination. 6,483 vessels crossed the channel. The soldier landing on the beaches had firstly to capture the German coastal defensive positions and then to advance inland. Normal infantry tactics were to lay down suppressive fire on the defenders, moving forward cover to cover in short bounds until the soldiers were close enough to rush and overwhelm the enemy positions. The German defensive lines were no less detailed. The Allied were to be met on beaches by an impressive line of coastal guns and bunkers, the Atlantic Wall. They were to be pinned down on the beaches by the so-called static division, manning the fortress, and then hit by a mobile reserve of panzers held inland. Both Allied and Germans suffered heavy losses, approximately 10,000 Allied casualties and German estimated between 4,000 and 9,000. Despite the losses, 160,000 men made it ashore and started to push inland. The need to maintain supplies and reinforcements was solved by a floating harbor system made out of concrete called Mallory. In following weeks, the Allied armies fought a series of fearsome battles to push the beachhead even further. The Allied pushed inland and kept the Germans at a constant retreat, moving from hedgerow to hedgerow in the so-called bocage system, a medieval field system that over time had become natural trench lines that could stop tanks. The Norman town of Caen was a D-Day objective. 3 weeks after D-Day, it was still German-held. Caen was the key to access the countryside to the south, where the bocage system ended and tanks could move freely. British General Bernard Montgomery called in the heavy bombers and systematically demolished Caen. After some time, as the Allied pushed further inland, the French people of Paris rose to a revolt. The Allied commanders refused to attack Paris for the sake of attacking, as they had learned a lesson of Stalingrad a year earlier, where a German army had been captured and slaughtered within the city. They believed that liberation could wait, and only military necessity justified attack. As it became clear that the city was fighting to free itself, the Allied was forced to act. They agreed that free French forces could be released, and on August 23rd, their tanks entered Paris. The German command surrendered. More bloody battles were to come, but the Battle of Normandy were over, and the Allied could for the first time taste real victory, as Charles de Gaulle led the Allied forces in a march of triumph down the Champs-Élysées.